U.S. history. We are in the second epoch of quarantine. Let's get started. So we finished the Civil War, and last week we took some time to recognize major contributions made by women, freed black men, immigrants, and Native Americans to the Civil War effort. Well, that brings us into our new unit alert! New unit alert! We are going to spend the last unit of the school year talking about Reconstruction. Reconstruction is a time in U.S. history after the Civil War where leaders had to figure out how to reconstruct the United States and seam back together the tear between the North and the South. So they had to figure out how to bring the nation back together as one. But let's back it up real quick. Let's go back to the end of the Civil War. Now, after the end of the Civil War, Lincoln was very proud of his accomplishments and happy to see that the war had finally ended.
Abraham Lincoln was 2 years into his second term as president.
Just 5 days after the Civil War ended, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth
in a theater in Washington, D.C. John Wilkes Booth went up right behind Abraham Lincoln and shot him in the head, as you can see in this image, and escaped by jumping off of the balcony.
This was the first assassination of a president in the United States. Now, everyone was shook and could not believe that this had actually happened, especially right after the war ended. However, John Wilkes Booth and other people were not happy about the results of the war, which is why he committed murder. Founding fathers had foreseen an event happening to where the president would no longer be able to attend to his presidential duties, whether that was death or illness. So, per the Constitution, the vice president was sworn into office, and that is how
Andrew Johnson became the 17th president of the United States.
Andrew Johnson had a huge job in front of him. He had to figure out how to reconstruct the United States after this war that tore them apart and created deeper divides of sectionalism within the United States. Technically, Reconstruction was the period between 1865 to 1877 where states who had seceded to form their own nation, the Confederate States, were readmitted back into the Union. So they essentially had to show the federal government that they were abiding by the federal laws to be admitted back into the United States. Reconstruction had three parts. Part 1, Presidential Reconstruction. That's where the president was in charge of Reconstruction. Part 2, Congressional Reconstruction, where Congress enacted laws to help Reconstruction. And Part 3, Southern Reconstruction, where the South actually had to, do their own work to be admitted back into the United States. For Presidential Reconstruction, this is now President Andrew Johnson. Part of President Johnson's plan for Reconstruction was that the Southern states had to ratify the new 13th Amendment.
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
So technically this language embedded within the 13th Amendment does stipulate that slavery is allowed in the United States. We will consider and explore these stipulations of words further in the future. The 13th Amendment technically abolished slavery throughout the United States. And since the war was fought over states' rights to have slaves, they had to obviously give up their right to have slaves. Another part of Presidential Reconstruction was creating the Federal Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau was a federal agency that was created to support the newly freed African Americans. Since they were slaves prior to being free, they didn't have property, they didn't have any type of wealth or anything that they could claim as their own. Whereas white people had this privilege to accumulate wealth and pass it on to their children, but slaves did not have this right. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to provide food, medical care, good working conditions, and jobs to the newly freed African American people. Remember, racism did not go away with the freeing of slaves. Whereas in the North, they just created a social caste of keeping black people away from the whites. In the South, they still yearn for the slave system. So the Southerners created these things called black codes. So black codes were created by the white people in power in the South in response to the Reconstruction amendments that they were being forced to pass. Black codes were a form of ways that white people wanted to systematically segregate black people from white people. Now, in your reading, you will figure out specifically what those black codes were that the white Southerners used to create into law a system of white supremacy, and you'll learn other things that the federal government was doing to help support freed African Americans as they transitioned to having to support themselves and live in this new world with literally no dollars. Remember to write in complete sentences and reach out to me or Mr. Tyrell through email or during office hours Monday through Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. Good luck, historians. You got this.